back it up a little bit. Live, no one's watching, so it doesn't matter. All right. Nope, horn's out of shot. Okay, now I think everybody's in there. All right. It always has one there, so I don't know if that's me logged in or if somebody's actually watching. No clue. It looked like the live chat was disabled last time. I don't know. Who knows? Probably not. I'm sure nobody's watching, but whatever. Here we are for the third official episode of Those Two Metal Dudes. Today we have guest, my son Oren, and so we're going to call this 2.5 Metalheads, the Charlie Sheen edition. So today we're going to discuss 3 bands, in particular Mastodon, Neurosis, and Slipknot. And basically we've each chosen one of those bands, and we're going to sort of state our case on why we think they are so influential in their specific genre and in metal. And you know, one of the, really all 3 bands I think are 3 of the most influential metal bands in the last 30 years. So Chris is going to talk about Neurosis. I'm going to talk about Mastodon, and Oren is going to talk about Slipknot. We're going to also kind of back and forth, and we'll all kind of give our opinions and maybe add some things about all 3 bands, because we all 3 know a good bit about all 3 bands. So we're going to start it off with Chris. He's going to tell you the ins and outs and the goods about Neurosis, the holy Neurosis.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm going to talk about Neurosis, the Shaman of Sludge. That is what I've come up with after listening to their albums. Again, going through their discography and just trying to reintroduce myself to a lot of it. Neurosis was formed in 1985 in Oakland, California. So I think during all I guess out of the 3, Neurosis would have to be the godfather out of all this.
They're old timers.
Yeah. So Road Dogs, pretty much a band that never really got any kind of respect. I don't think truly for what they do. For a band to have created so many subgenres to metal, coming out of what would be called the post-hardcore. To me, Neurosis is pure emotion. It's almost like when they play songs and stuff, it's like rituals, and that's why I had to use the term shaman. They're just emotionally based. From when the first time that I heard them, I went to Nashville and went with my parents, and we stayed at Aubrey Mills Hotel, and then I went to Tower Records and bought the Ozfest live '96 VHS tape, which had them on it. I didn't know who they were. Watched it, immediately fell in love with them, and really never looked back since from them. A band that has changed their sound all through their career. From being a really fierce hardcore band, their hardcore stuff is awesome. I didn't really pay much attention to that when I got into them, but then revisiting fierce, Pain of Mind is just straight up hardcore. The word is law. You can start hearing the change. They start getting, it starts becoming a little weird hardcore. That's what, to me, when I was listening to it, I was like, oh, okay, it's starting to become the change. And then Souls at Zero, that's when it all just started from what they are. Me and you have sat and listened to Souls at Zero many a times. I even played it for my girlfriend when I was listening to it, and she loved it. She never heard it before. Going from Souls at Zero to Enemy of the Sun, which to me is probably the epoch of it. I mean, Soul to Zero, you can hear it, you understand it, and then Enemy is that's just what Neurosis became.
I agree.
Through Silver and Blood was straight up experimental, great album, pure emotional. It's just everything is just it's just great. I think they'd had 20 or 26 tracks of just keyboard on that album. From what I was reading, they did so much backtracks and just everything on that album. But I think to me, Times of Grace sums them up perfectly from everything that they had done from '87 until 1999. It was just Times of Grace just has everything in it that would be. I call it the pinnacle of Neurosis. It's just what, A Sun That Never Sets is more of a change because that's what I love about Neurosis. And it's just that they just automatically, whatever they do the most of on one album, the next one is they take from what they didn't do and then they make it the more of it. With Times of Grace, heavy, and then you go into A Sun That Never Sets, and it's got like folk, acoustic. It's all the lighter stuff, but it's more with a little bit of heavy. Eye of Every Storm is heavy with a little bit of, So that's what I've always loved it. And two, they're like in a league of bands to where their fans allow them to be creative in any kind of way. Another band would be like Faith No More, Clutch, Primus, Tool, where they can just do whatever. They have this creative freedom. I guess to me, it's just pure emotional. And in the pantheon of metal, I would consider them the Anubis, the spirit god. And if you're ever straying or in metal and looking for the truth, I think you can always find it with Neurosis. It's just, I don't know. It's just, as Mike has Mastodon, and when he goes into Mastodon, he will talk about Neurosis with them. Just like we talked to Braun when we met him, and him talking about Times of Grace being just influential to him. But I'm pretty much, I could go on. I could keep rambling on. I mean, we could all ramble on about Neurosis and everything, but I'm gonna yield my time and let everybody get a turn, and I'm gonna pass it to Mike, let him, or whoever wants to.
What do you have to add to the Neurosis conversation? I know you got a couple albums there.
Yeah, I have a lot more Neurosis albums, but I just decided to bring two of them, Times of Grace and Enemy of the Sun. The CDs that are like, the Neurosis albums that are pretty much the most important to me because of like the heaviness and the emotion. I just really like Enemy of the Sun a lot. And the self-titled track is just so powerful and heavy. And Lexicon with the noisy stuff. I just really like this album. And then Times of Grace, which is pretty much like what everyone would know Neurosis from. Like, that's kind of their magnum opus, I guess. Like, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
No, definitely.
So with Enemy of the Sun, I can say, like, I remember when I was playing in my bands, like in the late 90s, and playing like shows with other bands, or even like playing. I remember my band at the time played a festival in Florida with Under Oath and Chalice and Sleeping by the Riverside and Further Seems Forever, which had Chris Carrabba, who later went on to become the Dashboard Confessional, super successful MTV rock star dude. And before Under Oath was even heard of, they were just this local Florida band that was playing, a mix of like death metal and hardcore. And so anyways, I'm getting off topic, but, some really cool bands and a cool experience. But I remember Chalice, this other local Florida band, and one of the guitar players had the Enemy of the Sun shirt on. And I remember a few years later, I got a DVD from Stillborn Records, Jamie Josta from Hatebreed's label, and it was like a DVD compilation of all these bands that were on Stillborn music videos, and one of them was A Thousand Falling Skies, which I liked the video so much I went on and bought their CD a few years later. But their guitar player in the video, one of the guitar players, had the Enemy of the Sun shirt on. And I remember going to shows in Birmingham, in Atlanta, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, like 98, 99, 2000. And I would always see at least one person with an Enemy of the Sun shirt on. So to me, that's sort of like, that's kind of like, you know, they're maybe not their greatest album, maybe it is, but it was definitely the album that really was making a huge impact in like metal and hardcore scenes with bands and fans and everybody. You know, Souls of Zero, you know, I think that was Warren's first Neurosis album that he got. And, you know, I mean, you pretty much summed it all up. Times of Grace, the magnum opus, it's well said. I think that's really the one album where they started to get a little bit of recognition.
Yeah.
They didn't really get a lot before, like with Enemy of the Sun and through Silver and Blood. They got recognized on a lower level, like with their peers and with other bands and people like us who were playing music and crappy local bands and stuff. And then with Times of Grace, they started getting on bigger tours. You know,
Right.
Because when I saw Neurosis, the one time I saw them, they were opening up for Soulfly. Hatebreed was opening up for Neurosis at the time. That's how long ago that was before Hatebreed became really big, successful band. And that was on the Times of Grace era, period. It wasn't necessarily, I don't think it was an actual tour because they weren't headlining that show, but they played, you know, track off of Times of Grace. And so that was definitely where they got recognized. And I think after that, they kind of went back to Neurosis being this cult band, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Times of Grace is sort of the one album, I think, for Neurosis where they got recognized for a little while, you know. And it is unfortunate. They're, like you said, they're like a Faith No More, a King's X, you know, that kind of band where I've always thought they even a Crowbar, you know, they influenced hundreds, maybe thousands of bands and you know, influenced all these little subgenres of metal. But they themselves haven't really ever become like super commercially successful, wealthy. I mean, you know, they working guys, they have regular jobs and everything.
Yeah, they are the, you know, like to talk about like people seeing the shirts back in the day. It was to represent that you listened, you were paying attention to the underground. Neurosis was a big band in the underground people. I mean, like you would have to find people that were in the know to know who they were. You know, where you go up and you tell a person, you're like, man, your band sounds like Neurosis. And a lot of people back in the day would be like, well, who was that? And then you had to stand there and just kind of just, hey, man, you need to go and listen to, you know. But it's just them having that creative freedom to do whatever they want to do, and they do it, and they don't care. Because the only time that I watched the interview with them, and Scott Kelly said that the first time they did a really big tour was with Pantera, and he was thanking Pantera in the video about taking them on tour, which the tour was. Clutch was the opening band, Neurosis and Pantera. That was the tour. So to have a time machine, my friend, that would have been cooler. But like I said, though, we could sit here and just make this whole thing about Neurosis, but we have two other bands that we have to discuss. But I think starting off with pretty much the Godfathers of the underground, you know, it's pretty suiting, you know.
And I know when we were in Sciatica together, that was, you know, like it was Neurosis and Crowbar were the two driving influences, and so we would often get compared to bands that were nowhere in that ballpark, and it would make us mad sometimes. And so after several years of playing and touring and doing everything, we played a show in North Carolina, and this band from Atlanta, one of the guys in the band said that we sounded like Neurosis mixed with Crowbar with female vocals, and it was like the only time anybody had ever gotten it, and it was like almost like wanted to cry, you know. It was like, wow, somebody finally got it.
You know, they hear it.
And for me, you know, like when I got into Neurosis, it was the same thing. It was the Ozfest video, VHS. You know, watching that live performance of Locust Star first introduction at all to Neurosis, and I was instantly hooked. I was like this dual guitar attack, and then David Edwardson, the bass player, coming in with these low, just guttural, deathy kind of, and it was like this triple vocal assault, and the pounding of the organ pedals and stuff, and it was just man, I mean, it took like 3 seconds, and I was like, man.
Well, it took the Scott Kelly strength.
Yeah.
When it came in, Locust Star, and it just came blaring through the speakers, I remember just sitting there and my jaw dropping, being just in awe and enamored about the whole thing of it. And then when it peers out to the crowd, when they're rocking out, there's hardly anybody there. They're playing during the day, and nobody, and here they are putting on just probably one of the best performances probably of the day, and nobody cared.
It was, I've been listening to metal for, I don't know, probably at least 5, 6, 7 years at that point. I thought I knew metal until I saw that, and then it totally changed my whole perception of, wow, metal can be this. And it's not chugga chugga palm mute, death growls, double bass, But same experience when I saw Neurosis the one time. They went on after Hatebreed, so there was all the hardcore guys there that hated Neurosis because they were there to see Hatebreed, and then you had all the what we called mall metal people at the time that were there to see Soulfly. So me and the lead singer for Last Transgression in Montgomery were there, and we were 2 of probably 10 people in the Tabernacle, and it was a lot of people. And we were like 2 of maybe 10 or 15 people that were like just banging our heads and like
excited,
in the moment, in trance with Neurosis, just kind of looking around. Like we heard, hardcore kids walking by with Celtics jerseys and stuff, like talking trash, and they didn't get it, because it wasn't breakdown bounce hardcore, and we didn't care. It was amazing. So anyway, Neurosis, man, the Holy Grail. I'm gonna pass it. Yes.
Locust Star is a classic
Yes,
song.
amazing. I'm going to pass it to Warren. He's going to give his input, take research on Slipknot and why he feels they're one of the more influential metal bands, and definitely one of the most, if not the most influential in the new metal genre. So,
Yeah.
take it away.
I only have like 3 of their albums, so I really only am familiar with the first 3.
Only ones.
But yeah. So their first album was really more of like a heavy kind of
A heavy corn new metal kind
Yeah,
of.
like-
Yeah, definitely.
and it was just like really speedy and fast, and the rapping also. A lot of people really didn't like this album, but then when they came out with Iowa, which had like a bunch more like elements of death metal and stuff, like some people like started getting hooked on this album.
More
I am that guy.
Yeah, more
He's
metal
got
heads
me.
started to take notice with Iowa. For sure.
Yeah, it was. This is always going to be like a classic Slipknot album. And then their third album, like, I really feel like this one doesn't have that much notice, but it is a really good album, though. Some of the songs, like, incorporate elements of, like, rock music, and I actually like those songs that aren't really exactly metal. They did a good job with this album, and there's still a lot of really heavy songs, and the recording quality is still great. Great songs like The Blister Exists, Opium of the People. A lot of great songs on this one also. That's all.
Cool. Yeah, I'm just my little input on the Slipknot. On the first album, obviously, you have people that love it and people that hate it. I don't think there's really a middle ground with this album, or really, for the most part, with the band. Because it was definitely like it was on that new metal train. It was kind of like they took what Korn and Mudvayne and the Deftones and Limp Bizkit and Incubus and a lot of those bands that are in that genre They took what they were doing, but they made it heavier. There was a lot of double bass because Joey Jordison was this maniac drummer with just super fast feet. And of course, these guys, like, they really weren't the like innovators or inventors of the wearing costumes and masks. I mean, there's bands that did it before. There was a band called Mushroom Head. War's been doing it forever. But then there's Mushroom Head, who really was doing almost exactly what Slipknot was doing way before. But Mushroom Head never made it into that commercial realm that Slipknot did. I think because Slipknot just did it better, and they probably had better agents and better record label representation and stuff. So I mean, I just, me personally, I never got it much into Mushroom Head. I tried, but it just similar animal, but just I think Slipknot's better at it. So with this one, it's definitely like the pure metal heads don't like it. It's new metal. They're a lot of pure metal heads are not going to listen to new metal. But I liked it because I was like, well, this is cool because I liked the stuff that Korn was doing in the early days, and of course I love Deftones and some of those other bands. But when I heard Slipknot, I was like, wow, so they're doing what Korn's doing, but they're really metalizing it more. But they were still on the radio and real successful at it. So I mean, that's a good album. I like it. Iowa is definitely the album where they woke up the metalheads. Yes, and I know there's still a lot of metalheads, the purists that still don't care for this either, just because they wrote them off with the first album, and people that just refuse to listen to them.
And you're crazy because that is a great album.
But I liked the first album, and then I remember going to Furnace Fest and talking to Dan, the singer for Zayo, and he had all this inside information about this album before it was put out. And I remember me and a couple other random strangers that were at the festival talking to him at the merch booth, and he talked our ear off for 45 minutes about this album before it was out, and was telling us that you need to listen to it. This is going to change everybody's opinion of Slipknot. He said it's there's so much death metal on it, because he said Mick, the one of the guitar players, the big dude, he's a death metal guy. He's a huge death metal fan, and that's where that influence came in. And I guess he had a big hand in the songwriting. And I mean, it's got the goats and stuff on the front and the back. So I mean, they were really going with the darker, kind of imagery and everything. And it's just, it's heavy, brutal. I mean, everything about it, just brutal guitar riffs, angry vocals. The lyrics are super dark. The drumming is great. I mean, it's an awesome album. And then they kind of they jumped off that train, I guess, because the record label and agents and everybody else's publicists are probably like, yeah, you guys are going to lose fans. You're not going to make as much money. We can't play this on the radio. So you need to go back in the old direction and slick it up and write some rock songs too. So they put out this album, which, the third album, Subliminal Verses. I'm not super familiar with it, but what I've heard, I do like. There's some heavy stuff on it. It's very, very, very well produced. So it's definitely slick production. Maybe a little too slick for some people, but there's still some really heavy stuff on here and some good rock songs. Can't really get much into anything they've really done since then. I haven't really cared for a lot of it. It's just real radio rock friendly. But for a while, Slipknot was a metal band, and I definitely think that they were a polarizing band in that genre. And,
I mean, the only thing after the 3 albums that I know of Slipknot is the song off of their 5th album. I think it's their 5th album, the song Psychosocial. That was a big hit.
So I mean, for a few years, not brief. I mean, they had a pretty big chunk there for it seems like 5, 6, 7 years, maybe longer, where they were playing every festival. They were headlining huge, massive shows, playing
every magazine,
every magazine cover. They had radio singles, videos. I mean, and they really, I think they kind of took what Korn had sort of Korn, kind of like the godfathers of nu metal. They sort of created, unknowingly this genre that a lot of people hate, and then other people swear by. But whatever, love them, hate them, Korn definitely brought heavier music into the mainstream where it really wasn't before, when grunge kind of pushed heavy metal out of the way for a little while. And then all you heard on the radio was Nirvana and Pearl Jam and everything. And love those bands, but you know, we won't talk about that because it's a metal show. But anyway, Slipknot really kind of took what Korn and those other bands were, and they went more extreme, but they were still able to make it accessible and, you know, get the younger kids into it. And so Slipknot's definitely been a huge influential band in their genre as well as metal as a whole. So love them or hate them, that's how it is.
Another thing about Slipknot, though, what I didn't know, but reading up on them, was that Corey Taylor had started Stone Sour, and that was his main band, and Slipknot was the side band. He got Slipknot going and got famous, and then turned around and then brought those guys and got them to come. And I thought that was really cool that he went back and got the guys in Stone Sour to come, you know, like after he's already been successful. And it's like, hey, man, you know, let's go make some money, you know, like get this, you know, to get it going. But I think with the first album, though, that they rode the train to get themselves, you know, to get their foot in the door. Then when they got their foot in the door and they got signed, when they did Iowa, I think Iowa is really what they wanted to do. I think the first album was something that they did to get signed. Okay, let's get the contract, let's get in there, and then it's like, okay, guys, we need another album. Boom, when they drop Iowa, I think that's really how they really felt about their music. But I'm kind of like with Mike, though. I only know up to the 3 albums, which sincerely apologize to anybody who's watching it. But Iowa, to me, is probably my favorite Slipknot album that I heard. I was like Warren was talking about, I was the guy that didn't really pay much attention to the first thing, only because of the fact of that I'm 37, and when I would have to go to the grocery store with my mom, they would be on Hit Parader, Metal Edge, probably on Metal Maniacs, anything that you could get, they were there. And then you heard the first album, you're like, oh well, it's just, you know, But then when Iowa came up, though, that's when it was just everything. It just changed. You know, like the whole concept of what you thought, what I thought they were, and then I heard that, and I was like, oh, these guys actually, you know, they like death, you know, like metal, you know. But I would say Corey Taylor out of the new metal bunch is probably the best vocalist out of anybody. Which, I mean, even now, Corey Taylor's amazing. As far as his cleaning and going into the guttural low, he's probably one of the better frontmen of today. I think if you were going to do a band, you know, he would be probably one of the first people you would probably want to jam with to come in if you're wanting to do something like that, to have a guy who can sing and then turn right around and then hit those lows. But yeah, I mean, Slipknot would be, you know, probably the kings of the new metal, you know, as far as musicianship and vocal. And then I'm done.
That's a good point. That's a good point about Corey Taylor's vocals, because I think I think he gets severely overlooked as a vocalist because of the genre, because of Slipknot. And when you listen to a lot of the new metal bands and bands in that genre, the vocalists are not usually the guys that are great. You know, I mean, a lot of them kind of do the same thing. You know, some of them do the rapping, screaming. You know, but with Corey Taylor, great voice, great singer. He can do death growls, lows. He can do the high screams. He's very versatile. He's really a good vocalist, and not, you know, singing and doing the really aggressive metal vocals. And yeah, definitely a guy I would pick. I think the big difference between the first album and Iowa Slipknot, like you were talking about, was that first album sounded like the new metal sound, and you know, that's Ross Robinson. You know, that's
definitely, I read about that.
The difference with Iowa is it was produced by Ross Robinson, but it was mixed by Andy Wallace. He's a metal guy.
There we go.
I think that's where that came from, and I think it's like I had a documentary on VHS of Slipknot because I love their first 2 albums, you know, back then, and I would say, like, you can't say, oh, these guys are posers. They're not real metal. Those guys are into old school Morbid Angel. I mean, you know, they're very diverse, so they got into that category, but I think some of them are more into metal than others, and so that's why their sound has kind of gone like this, like a roller coaster, and being on a pretty major record label and having all those things. They're a band that's really just kind of like, they've done this their whole career. They'll go down and record like a rock album, basically, you know, and then hey, we want to write some heavy stuff because we still like metal. So they're just kind of a weird band, but
side note on Slipknot, like the way I discovered them and like started getting into their music, I pretty much bought their first album without even knowing what it would even sound like, and then I just instantly fell in love with the album.
Been there, done that.
Yeah. Not with that, but with other bands. I know exactly what you're saying.
And I still have their first album on cassette tape, so I got it when it came out.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
All right, so I'm last. On to Mastodon.
Oh, boy.
The final in the three band discussion. Okay.
Fun fact: Mastodon is my favorite band.
True story. Me and Oren went and saw them this last time back in October last year at Exit 111 Festival in Tennessee. Put on an amazing show, huge stage. Never seen them on a stage that big. They had a laser light show. Their visuals were incredible. It was literally like watching a Pink Floyd visual experience, but with a progressive metal band.
Like instead of like the circle thing.
Blown away. You know, I mean, that band, I've watched them literally from playing in front of 80 people at the Knights of Columbus in Huntsville, Alabama, when I brought them here in 2003, to playing on a huge stage at a festival outside in front of 5, 10, 15,000 people. It's crazy.
Proud of them.
And they deserve it, man. Those
Yeah.
guys are workhorses, super nice guys, amazing musicians. So let's get this Mastodon train rolling. They formed in 2000. So as Chris stated earlier, the first experience we had with Mastodon, I think probably the first time I ever heard them was in New Orleans when we just happened to be down there separately, coincidentally. I was actually down in Louisiana, an hour or two away from New Orleans, visiting family with my wife, and I think Chris and his bandmates had gone to New Orleans to hang out, or maybe to go to the show or something.
We were just in New Orleans to go to New Orleans.
It was a last minute kind of thing where we're like, hey, we'll make the drive a couple hours from Thibodaux or Houma, Louisiana, wherever we were at, and meet you guys in New Orleans. And I think we all got a hotel room or something, some shady place, and all stayed there. Zeppelin's in Metairie, Louisiana, a little suburb of New Orleans. Awesome, you know, this Relapse bill, Dysrhythmia, Bongzilla, Burnt by the Sun, Mastodon. I was familiar with one of the bands. Like Bongzilla was really the only band I'd really ever heard. I didn't know anything about Dysrhythmia. I really didn't know anything about Burnt by the Sun, and I really didn't know Mastodon either. And really, all those bands were great. I ended up bringing Dysrhythmia to Huntsville too, a month before Mastodon. Yeah, a month before. And so that was a really cool show. I remember seeing the bass player for Burnt by the Sun setting up his rig, and we thought that he was a roadie or a bass tech because he was just talking to us like he was just some normal dude.
Right.
And we still had that impression that, you know, musicians in these bands don't talk to people, you know, because they're rock stars or whatever. So, oh man, he starts warming up and he's playing this crazy stuff. We're like, oh wow, he can't be the bass tech. He's way too good to just be a bass tech. He's got to be in the band. And sure enough, he was. Those guys were awesome. Paul Romano was the artist for all of the Mastodon albums up through Crack the Sky. After Crack the Sky, he was no longer their artist. They went in a different direction, starting with The Hunter when they got, I'll get to that one. Let's see. Okay, Blood Mountain. We'll start with Blood Mountain because it's the oldest of the three particular albums I'm going to reference. Blood Mountain came out in 2006, and I think Mastodon's one of the most influential metal bands of the 20th century. In the last 20 years, they've been around for 20 years exactly, but I kind of feel like they, Metallica has pretty much been the top of the top in metal since I was a kid, you know, for 30 plus years, and no one will ever take that from them. It's impossible for a metal band now, the way that music is sold digitally, people go to concerts less often, etc., for a band to ever take that from them. So Metallica will always be the biggest, most successful kings of metal, whether you like them or not. Right. Whether you have opinions of their later work, that's all irrelevant, really, because Metallica will and always will be, it's, you know, the highest selling metal band of all time. No one will ever take it. It's impossible unless some kind of crazy music revolution happens, and I don't see that happening. So I think Mastodon Obviously, nowhere near that that status of Metallica or record sales, etc. But I think they've kind of become to me, kind of like the second coming. They've kind of like taken the torch that Metallica has held and still holds, and they've kind of in a smaller arena, but they're one of the few metal bands in the last 10 years that have been able to play festivals, stadiums, arenas, large venues, and have high selling albums, Billboard debuts, in the top 20, 30, 40, 50, very successful, playing late night shows, Conan O'Brien, all that stuff, even getting songs on the radio. Just really, there's not really any newer metal bands that have come out in the last 20 years that, outside of maybe like Lamb of God,
Right.
But like I'm talking about Lamb of God, I'm talking about Mastodon. So Blood Mountain is their third highest selling debut album behind the other two albums I'm going to talk about. Totally, coincidental. I didn't know this when I was researching this, but behind Crack the Sky and The Hunter. So I didn't know this, but when I picked these three albums, because of all the reasons I'm going to state, these are actually their three highest selling debut albums that they've had in the catalog. So I guess I know my stuff. It's one of the highest selling albums in the U.S. This album sold over 200,000 copies in the U.S. alone, not worldwide. So that's very impressive for a band to do in 2006 in metal. It was their major label debut, Reprise Records, a division of Warner. Their previous albums sold around 100,000 and 50,000, roughly, U.S. estimate. So still pretty good, but nowhere near Blood Mountain status. Colony of Birchmen was nominated for a Grammy for Best Metal Performance in 2007. That's kind of their big hit off of this album. Matt Bayless was the producer. If you listen to metal and you have a lot of metal in your collection, you should know that name. He's from Seattle. He's produced ISIS, Soundgarden, Norma Jean, Pearl Jam, Botch, and a slew of other bands. So Matt Bayless is a great producer, and you can hear it on this album because it's a very, very good sounding album. It's a concept album, like pretty much all their albums, and this one is about climbing up a mountain and all the things that can happen to you when you're stranded on a mountain, hallucinations and all the stuff that goes on. So it's really cool. Scott Kelly from Neurosis does guest vocals on Crystal Skull. Josh from Queens of the Stone Age, Ike from the Mars Volta, Cedric from At the Drive-In, all guest vocalists on this album. Very cool. So that also shows where they had kept climbing up that ladder of success and getting recognized by their peers. You got guys in these other bands that are well known and successful doing guest vocals, and of course having Scott Kelly, who's done guest vocals on just about every album they've put out.
Pretty much.
And knowing what huge fans they were of Neurosis, I know that's just got to be the greatest. Braun, the drummer, and Bill, one of the guitar players, are both from New York. They originally were in a band called Lethargy. It's like a math metal band. They also were on one of the Today's the Day albums.
And the
which is super cool. Great album. They met Brent and Troy at a High on Fire show in Atlanta. Brent is originally from the Birmingham area in Alabama, Pelham area. This album, it got so many accolades. They had music from this album on multiple video games. They toured a lot on this album. They opened for Metallica during this album cycle. They got a lot of awards and accolades in magazines. They played with Tool in Europe, Slayer in Australia and New Zealand. They performed Colony of Birchmen on Conan, which is their first network TV appearance to 2.4 million viewers watching on television. I remember watching it when they played, and I was like, holy crap. I had these guys in Huntsville 3 years ago at the Knights of Columbus, and now they're playing in front of 2 million people in Conan. So this album really, to me, was the album that when Mastodon really started to break through into the commercial mainstream success arena. The next album I'm going to talk about is Crack the Sky, 2009. I feel like this is kind of like their magnum opus. Most Mastodon fans would agree.
One of my favorite albums.
It's an epic masterpiece. You know, this is the album where they really turned into this prog rock machine. You know, they're like King Crimson and Pink Floyd and Rush and all those progressive rock elements, but still keeping the Thin Lizzy twin guitar sound and still keeping the metal roots intact as well. This was a total shift vocally for Mastodon. There really was not any harsh screaming vocals. It's all singing. This is their second highest selling debut album. It sold 41,000 copies in the first week, which is quite impressive. Brendan O'Brien was the producer on this. Brendan O'Brien has done Stone Temple Pilots, Bob Dylan, AC/DC, Pantera, Korn, etc. He's even a bigger name than like Matt Bayless. So, you know, very, very well produced album. Braun, this is the first time Braun, the drummer, starts singing lead vocals. You know, on the first track, you know, Oblivion, which is epic, super long, amazing, you know, his lead vocals. Then you got Troy doing vocals in the song. You've got Brent, one of the guitar players, doing all three of them singing in the same song, all completely different vocal styles. This another concept album, basically about Braun's sister Sky, died of suicide at age 14. So this album is like an homage to her. Braun and Troy, during the recording and writing of this album, they listened religiously to Pink Floyd's Animals. So that's definitely where you hear, like, you know, you pop this in, you start to hear, man, it's like they sound like a metal Pink Floyd now, you know. Scott Kelly again does guest vocals, and
On the
just
subtitle.
man, this album, wow, amazing. And the final album we'll talk about, some people don't like this album. A lot of people say it's just not heavy and, you know, whatever. I disagree. This is when they went with a new artist. AJ Fawcett did woodwork on this album cover. Really cool. Totally different from all their other albums, but still really, really unique and neat. This album came out in 2011. Mike Elizondo was the producer. This album sold over 75,000 copies in the U.S. as of 2011. So that was 9 years ago. There's no telling how many it's sold right now. Black Tongue, the first song off this album, really just rips to me. I mean, it's still really heavy. It's got a nasty, really low tune guitar riff on it. Still really heavy. Curl of the Burl was their big singles. First time I ever heard them on the radio, and a lot of people don't like that, but hey, you know. Mike Elizondo, interesting, and it's probably where this, you know, commercialism, you know, of this album and people maybe not liking it is really primarily a producer that has done rap and hip hop. He's worked with 50 Cent, Eminem. He's a protege of Dr. Dre. He's recorded Ry Cooder, Carrie Underwood, Alice Cooper, Avenged Sevenfold, Gary Clark Jr. So he's done a lot of his stuff is not really in the metal realm. So maybe that's where the sound is not as, you know, heavy and raw and everything. But still, a lot of good songs on here. Still a really good album and really successful. So it's another one of those albums in the Mastodon catalog that, you know, has helped them climb up that successful ladder that they've been working towards for so long. So, you know, I think Mastodon is really just the pinnacle of progressive metal in this day and age.
I agree.
And their musicianship is like, I mean, I don't know how you get higher. I mean, Braun is one of the best drummers that I've ever seen. And then the guitar work between Bill and Brent is ridiculous at times. I mean, I've tried to learn
riff lords.
I've tried to learn some Mastodon songs, and some of them are just impossible to learn. I mean, they're so notey and technical and complex and complicated. Those guys are severely talented, and I think sometimes overlooked guitarists. I mean, they are getting more noticed and more recognized in the world of guitar lately, but I mean, really, they should be in the same conversation as any other of the guitar gods that you reference when it comes to guitar shredders and metal guitar gods. So
That's pretty much my spiel on Mastodon. I love their whole catalog. All their albums are great. You know, the first album, Remission, on Relapse Records, is still their heaviest. You know, and
That was my introduction.
but their latest, Emperor Sand, that came out in 2017, is another epic album that I think is really they've taken kind of that crack the sky element and taken it even a step further. But there's still heavy stuff from their old days that you can hear, and then there's some of the more radio friendly stuff that you can hear, like on The Hunter and Once More Around the Sun. So, you know, I've seen them 5 times, and they've never disappointed. So, anything to add to the Mastodon?
I'll let Warren.
I brought 2 of my favorite, like my 2 favorite Mastodon albums, Crack the Sky and Leviathan. My dad already talked about Crack the Sky, but I'm probably going to talk a little bit more about it. As my father said, their magnum opus pretty much, like, it defines who they are. Plenty of great songs on here. They're pretty much their ballad, Oblivion, the Tsar, like that. And I like how they, like, put more lengthy songs in here, like the Tsar and the Last Baron. They also did that in Leviathan on Hearts Alive, but I'm going to talk about that later. And Scott Kelly doing vocals on the self-titled track, Crack the Sky. It's just a powerful, beautiful album. It's probably one of my favorite albums of all time. So, Leviathan. Amazing, crushing, heavy. It's just, and thrashy on some tracks like Blood and Thunder. And even some elements of sludge metal also. Also, Scott Kelly did vocals on Aqua Dementia. And there's just a lot of great songs. And a lot of great riffs. As all that, like, have some of the best riffs. Great album. These are great albums.
Mastodon, they get 4 horns up for me.
Yes.
You got anything you want to add?
My introduction was March of the Fire Ants off of Remission. Loved it. Really, like, you know, even Life's Blood, you know, the beginning, you know, of them. To me, they're very underlooked musicians. It's just like you were talking about, Mike. I mean, you know, Brent and Bill as a duo were just going to reiterate. I mean, they are riff masters, riff lords, whatever you want to call it. I mean, and then Braun. I mean, enough said. And then, I mean, Troy is a bass player. I mean, it's all. I mean, like, they're all just. I mean, just great musicians, and now great vocalists. It seems like they when they wanted to, they worked on themselves all through these years. They just their career is that of Neurosis to me. It just mirrors one another. Starting out heavy, being something that's heavy, Mastodon, Neurosis, and then they go and then they start changing. They start just freshening up their sound, experimenting. And they just kind of do whatever they want in a sense. Because, I mean, and two, they love all forms of music, it seems like. They just, they always have their hands in you know, in things, you know, and doing stuff. I see, okay, I've seen Mastodon on the Remission tour and the Leviathan tour. The Leviathan tour, I saw them open up for Slayer, and they were with Killswitch Engage, so it was Mastodon, Killswitch Engage, and Slayer. That was Atlanta Tabernacle. But each great live band and great people. If you ever get to meet them, awesome people. They were the first band that I guess really being able to talk to and to meet, and that's why I was just when Mike mentioned them, seeing them in front of 15 to 20,000 people, it's like I'm proud of them because I mean they're good dudes and they're road dogs. They're like I said, I mean coming here playing Huntsville, Alabama in front of 80 people. I mean that may be an exaggeration, maybe less than that. I mean, and then turning around and then a year later there was Slayer, and then a few years later there was Metallica. I mean like. Because these other bands, I mean, like you can't hear Mastodon and just be like, oh well, these guys are just regular metal. Oh no. I mean, like you listen to Mastodon and it's this whole just array of just metal within their albums, and that's what I really love about them is that they just capture all aspects of metal within their albums. It's just whatever mood you're in, you just pick an album in sequence. You're like, man, I want to hear something heavy but heavy technical. Go to Remission, go to Leviathan, a little experimental and feel kind of being out there. Crack the Sky. I mean, like you just kind of just pick wherever you want to go, and you just kind of just follow the journey and just come out on the other end, just going, just wow, these guys. I mean, these guys care about what they do, And I agree with Mike, and even if Dorn has said it, I mean, like these dudes are. As far as just the turn of the century, they would have to be top tier. You would probably, somebody out there would throw Lamb of God. Yeah, I would take that. I mean, they are too. But Mastodon, as far as just a metal, I mean, you can't really go wrong with that.
Yeah, they're definitely up there.
And Troy he's the bass player for Thin Lizzy now, So,
oh, I did not know that. Oh, wow.
He's been their bass player for 2 or 3 years now, I think. And then, a bunch of them have side projects and super groups and everything. So,
Killer Be Killed, Troy, with Max and the singer from Dillinger and the drummer from Mars Volta. Is that correct? I didn't do research on that also. That just popped in my head. So,
three good picks, 3 good bands, 3 very influential bands. Doesn't matter. Everybody's watching, but it's cool. It's fun to talk about this stuff with other people besides saying it in our heads.
Yeah, because it just gives us opportunity to re-listen to things and have it feel have feelings again about and which I know Warren's only 11, but with me and Mike, I mean it reminds us of being teenagers. Especially like with Neurosis, that goes back. Mastodon, we were already in our 20s, but it was just realizing, like, whoa, this is great musicianship. Slipknot, they were just everywhere, and they would probably be the best out of what probably some people would say commercial or mainstream metal. They would be the best out of all of that. So pretty much out of all 3, just kind of just take your pick about what kind of mood you're in, where you want to go,
That's true.
Yeah, and for me, I mean, like Neurosis, after being a fan for several years, at one point, playing in my own bands and stuff, they were the band that I wanted to have, Didn't happen, but that's pretty much what I wanted. I wanted to have a band that had that kind of longevity and staying power, but also a band that was like, even if they weren't commercially successful, they had so much influence and such a far reach, in the underground and just with so many bands, And then Mastodon, came along and pretty much, I'd already been playing music and listening to metal and stuff for quite a while, and they became, top 5 favorite metal bands for me, and still are, I mean, I can't really say that about any bands in the last 20 years that have come out that are like, oh yeah, they're one of my favorite bands ever, but Mastodon is the one band that is just like they changed the game, and they were a band for me that at the time was very inspirational because I'm like, when I brought them to Huntsville, they were all early 30s to late 20s, pushing 30, and I thought, well, maybe there's hope, for people like us, to someday have a successful music career. That was naive and stupid, but they still were inspiring for many years seeing the success that they didn't get until they were in their 30s. Because really, by the time they got to a major label and started really making any money at all, they were all well into their 30s, early, mid, late 30s. So I thought, hey, maybe there's hope, but there's not. So anyway, we're going to end the show in just a few minutes talking about some releases that we've all been listening to lately. I'll let Warren talk about them.
The two albums that I've been listening to lately are Cephalic Carnage's Lucid Interval and Converge's Jane Doe.
Oh man, that's two great albums. Go ahead.
Cephalic Carnage's Lucid Interval is just absolutely insane. I love it.
Oh god.
The riffs on the self-titled song, like the opening riff to the self-titled track, Lucid Interval, I just love that riff so much. And the song Black Metal Sabbath.
Oh,
The name is pretty much what the song is. Like 3 minutes of it is like black metal, and then the last half of it is like this Black Sabbath
that's it. Yeah.
riff.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of great songs on here. Pseudo, The Isle of California, Rebellion, Black Metal Sabbath, Lucid Interval, Arsenal Savior. There's tons of great songs on here. I love this album.
Great pick.
Great album.
And the second one, Converge's Jane Doe.
Mm.
It's a very crazy album. It's all over the place. I love it. Like the first song, Concubine, is just insane.
Oh, yeah.
And then the last song, the 11-minute long self-titled track, Jane Doe. I don't know why. I just like that song a lot. It's like probably my favorite on the album. I just think it's epic. Usually, for some reason, like my favorite songs on some albums are like the last songs that are like really long. I don't know. That's just me. I like long songs.
Great pick. What you been jamming lately?
Oh man, let me see. I've been doing quite a bit here. The new Heaven Shall Burn it's called Of Truth and Sacrifice. It is awesome. It's really long, but it's really awesome. And I think probably that the dude's vocals are probably some of my favorite vocals that I've heard so far in Meadows. Very sick, very just brutal. It reminds you of like At the Gates, Swedish death metal. I mean, you get it. I believe they're German, and it's a great album. Another one was Old Man Gloom. They're both their new albums. It's like a double album, Seminar 8 and Seminar 9. Old Man Gloom, you know what they're doing. Weird stuff. Weird, heavy stuff equals Old Man Gloom. That's just pretty much what I typed out. It's great. This band called, the last one is Living Gate, which is something new. They have a new EP off of Relapse. I compared it to, you took Suffocation and Cannibal Corpse, mixed it together, and that's the EP. That's what it sounds like. The EP is Death Lust. It's awesome. I think it's only 17 minutes and 56 seconds long. Great stuff. And then kind of like the retro stuff listed has been a lot of like In Flames, Exodus. Voivod. Negatron. I don't know if you.
My favorite Voivod album.
Yeah, I was trying to get into Voivod, and I stumbled upon that, and then found out that there was a different bass player and singer for that album, but that's really kind of the only Voivod album that I've liked.
Forrest, I believe.
Yeah,
that's my favorite album.
It's like a heavy crawl.
I like the vocals better on it.
Like it's just it's great. Just a lot of that, Acid Bath, just a lot of stuff that me and me have been listening to, but that newer stuff, the Heaven Shall Burn and Old Man Gloom and the Living Gate, really cool stuff. So
good pick on the Voivod. That's been my favorite album too, and probably with hardcore Voivod fans, it's probably one of their least favorites.
Oh, I imagine people if they watch it, they would probably throw
I
stuff at me. But I mean,
I like that album better than all the other stuff. I like some of the other Voivod albums. I've got a couple of them, but it's just, yeah, I like the vocals better when Eric Forrest was in there, and the riffs were heavy. The prong reference is a good one. I've been listening to tons of stuff besides the three I'm going to talk about. But I mean, some newer bands I've been getting into: Shadow of Intent, Swarms of the Sign, Lorna Shore. Finally started giving Carnifex a chance. Going back to Cannibal Corpse, Suffocation. You know, listening to some of the middle of the era Obituary albums. Kind of going back through my Sepultura phase, listening to some of their older albums. So much stuff. So I just picked these three. Cephalic Carnage. My pick is Misled by Certainty. It's a great album. It came out sometime in the 2000s on Relapse. I didn't do a lot of research. I've just been listening to it. I've listened to it like 10 times the other day in one day. So I've got my fill. I'll probably listen to some more Cephalic Carnage later. Because I can't get enough because I love that band.
Yeah, it's a band you don't really hear Kurt mentioned.
I mean, they're
they're
really,
very underrated.
I put like in grindcore, I put two bands at the very top, kind of side by side: Napalm Death and Cephalic Carnage.
Yeah.
I put Napalm Death as kind of the godfathers.
Godfather,
Cephalic
yeah.
Carnage just right below them, only because they're not really pioneers or godfathers necessarily, but I think they're
But they
really
do it beautifully.
one of the best grindcore bands in the genre, and they mix
Yes.
so much. Whereas a lot of grindcore bands just stick to one kind of specific
'Cause,
grind
like,
sound, and
they
they
even
mix
have-
death metal, sludge, doom, I mean,
And
thrash,
even jazz.
jazz. I mean, everything. The musicianship.
That's
is
what
through
I
the
said.
roof.
Musicianship for grind. I mean,
Live,
it's
live
there,
concerts, their energy is like Dillinger Escape Plan. So those guys, yeah, I think they're probably like the most underrated, overlooked grindcore band ever. Period. I mean, and the best. My next pick is a split that came out of Relapse in 2010 or 2011. It's two one-man band projects, Viral Load and Putrid Pile. Both Sean LeCan and Sean Whitaker. They're dudes that like have drum machines programmed. They play festivals. They tour all over the world and put albums out, and they do everything. They have no band. It's just them. I love and respect that. The artwork is really cool because it's kind of like these two demons fighting each other. One of them is for Viral Load, and one of them is kind of like they're the two one-man bands are fighting each other. The artwork is awesome. Lyrics are sick and crazy, which is what you get with the gore grind, brutal death metal stuff. Anyway, both these dudes are really good guitarists, super brutal vocalists, and somehow they program their drum machines to sound pretty decent. And it's weird watching them play like festivals in Austria in front of like 5,000 people, and it's just one guy on stage.
Oh wow!
And make it work. Maybe someday I can make that work too if I ever decide to play again. And my last pick, Oathbreaker. Rhea. This is a really good album. Came out on Death Wish Records, which, if you know anything about Death Wish,
It's just like Born Victim to Verge.
Verge. This one came out in 2016. It's in that black gaze, post-black metal genre that's sort of popped up in the last few years with bands like Alcest and Death Heaven and some other bands. Really cool female vocalists. These guys are from Belgium, and it's really different, unique, cool-sounding stuff. There's a lot of instrumental, melodic, ambient passages, and the singer sometimes sounds like Bjork and sort of moans and has this sultry kind of swaying water-like presence with her singing, and then it'll just blast out of nowhere into a million miles an hour, 280 BPM, drummer blast beats, and then she'll start screaming black metal vocals like a banshee from hell. And really cool stuff. I mean, it's beautiful and super dark and sad and depressing and really heavy. So definitely check out Oathbreaker if you get the chance. I don't have any of their other albums, but I'm definitely planning on getting more to add to the collection. But this one's really good. Rhea, check them out, Oathbreaker. So thanks, Oren, for being a guest on the show.
Yes, thank you.
My pleasure.
We'll hopefully be back next Saturday about the same time, roughly, with the next episode. It'll be a secret. You'll find out what it's about next week. And thanks for not tuning in, those of you who have not been watching. So until next time, from those 2.5 metal dudes.
Horns up.